Hey there, YouTube. Before I get into the video, let me remind you that if you like my content, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you feel the need to support me, hit me up on my Patreon at patreon.com/uncommonramen, capital U, capital R. I do all of this in my free time, so any amount of support can help me bring more of this content to you more often. Oops, sorry about that. All right, today we are going to take a look at a Street Fighter build that I made for Chun Li. I actually did two Street Fighter builds, one for Blanca, one for Chun Li. I chose to do the Chun Li video first because I like Azorius. I'm just a big fan of Azorius. So Chun Li is an Azorius commander. If you do the Universes Within version, you will have Zethi, Arcane Blade Master. They are the exact same card, just a different name and art. This is the Universes Within, and then this is the Street Fighter. So Chun Li is going to be an instant-based deck. The whole idea here is to exile instants with kick counters on them and then recast those over and over again. It has a very feather feel to it, except slightly more vulnerable, in my opinion. I've had a chance to play this a couple of times, and what I will say is that she's very susceptible to removal, and your opponents are going to kind of look at her as a kill on sight type of commander, which is understandable. So let's take a look at good old Chun Li here, who costs 1, a white, and a blue. She is a 3/3 with multi-kicker. If you're not familiar with multi-kicker, you can pay the multi-kicker cost multiple times, and you'll get to use the kick ability the number of times it's been paid. When Chun Li enters the battlefield, exile up to X target instant cards from your graveyard, where X is the number of times Chun Li was kicked. Put a kick counter on each of them. And then she has Lightning Kick. Whenever Chun Li attacks, copy each exiled card you own with a kick counter on it. You may cast those copies. Some important things to note here. She sees all cards with kick counters on them, whether they were there from previous times that she was cast. So the more times you cast her and kick her, the more cards you put under there, the more cards she sees. But more importantly, if you just cast her without kicking her, she still sees the original cards that were placed in exile with a kick counter on them. So very important to understand that. Secondly, when she attacks, she copies them, and you may cast the copies. It does not say you may play them without paying their mana cost, so you still have to pay the mana cost of the cards that are copied. They are there for you to cast, but you do not have to cast them. So that is Chun Li, Countless Kicks, or Zethi, Arcane Blade Master. We're going to start with creatures, and as you can imagine, there are going to be very few creatures in here, because we want to make room for a large pool of instants. The creatures that will be in here will be payoffs for instant and sorcery or spell, non-creature spell casting. While there are a low amount of sorceries in here, there are still sorceries in here, and instant payoffs are just instant sorcery payoffs still see instants. So we have Archmage Emeritus for 2 and 2 blue. It's a 2/2 with Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, you get to draw a card. It's a fantastic draw engine in here because it sees the cast of it. It also will see the copy of it. So you can't go wrong with this card. Very good. We have Baral, Chief of Compliance, 1 and a blue for a 1/3 body. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And whenever a spell or ability you control counters a spell, you may draw a card, and if you do, discard a card. That part of the text will happen once in a while, but the main part here is the mana reduction of instant and sorcery cards here, because some of these instants will cost more than 1 color pip, and so being able to drop the generic cost so we can cast more of them in a turn is important. Next up, we have Dika, Fractal Theorist, 4 and a blue for a 3/3 with Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, create a 0/0 green and blue fractal creature. Creature token, put X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is that spell's mana value. For 3 and a blue, target creature token can't be blocked this turn. This is probably more likely to to create an army of 1/1 elementals, but again, that helps you to either defend yourself or to swing wide. It offers a secondary strategy for a deck that's going to be casting a lot of instants quite often. Next up, we have Grand Arbiter Augustine the Fourth, I think. Yeah, fourth. For 2, a white and a blue, it is a 2/3. White spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Blue spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And spells your opponents cast cost 1 more to cast. It's a Staxy type of piece here, but it also brings reduction to your spells. And again, the more reduction we have in here, the more spells we can cast during each of our turns. Next up, we have Hullbreaker Horror for 5 and 2 blue, a 7/8 body with flash. This spell cannot be countered. Whenever you cast a spell, choose up to 1, either return target spell you don't control to its owner's hand, or return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. So the utility here is that we can bounce things at instant speed, or whenever Zethi attacks, every time she's casting a spell from her ability, that's another way to just bounce permanents, possible blockers. More importantly, if you cast an instant on somebody else's turn when they are casting a spell, you can simply bounce the spell back to their hand, very much like Aether Gust. I think it's called Aether Gust. Might be Aether Gale. One of those is a spell bounce, which is like countering it, but not really. It just puts it back so they can cast, so they are forced to cast it again, either next turn or again that turn. We have Leonin Lightscribe for 1 and a white. It's a 2/2 with Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. So it's kind of like a semi-prowess ability. This helps to buff up an army of creatures to help swing wide, or buff up Chun Li to make her very, very hard to block. Next up, we have Mercurial Spelldancer for 1 and a blue. It is a 2/1 body. Mercurial Spelldancer cannot be blocked. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on Mercurial Spelldancer. When Mercurial Spelldancer deals combat damage to a player, you may remove 2 oil counters from it. If you do, when you cast your next instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. There's a lot of spells in here that you want to see copies for, especially things like Snap or Swords to Plowshares, stuff like that, to help remove stuff from the board. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this deck is very susceptible to aggro. It's very susceptible to removal because it is a Voltron deck. It focuses on the commander specifically, and that makes it a very difficult thing to pilot when you're facing somebody who is playing either creature-heavy aggro or removal. Next up, we have Monastery Mentor for 2 and a white. It is a 2/2 with prowess. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. And whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you get to create a 1/1 white monk creature token that also has prowess. Again, just trying to create the army. The more threats that you have on the board, the less you require your commander, possibly, or the less threatening your commander might seem, although with Chun Li that's pretty difficult. Next up, we have Murmuring Mystic. For 3 and a blue, it's a 1/5 body. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 1/1 blue bird illusion creature token with flying. Again, just creating the tokens. This token has flying, so it has good evasion. Next up, we have Octavia Living Thesis. For 8 and 2 blue, it is an 8/8 body. This spell costs 8 less to cast. If you have 8 or more instant and or sorcery cards in your graveyard, it has Ward 8 and it has Spellcraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, target creature has base power and toughness 8/8 until end of turn. So really quickly to talk about the cost reduction here. Because Chun Li exiles cards from your graveyard, it might seem like that cost reduction is out the window, and that's just not true. There's enough instants in here, especially if Chun Li lives through a lot of removal, or if you choose not to cast her immediately, to allow for the cost reduction here to actually happen. So when it does see its Spellcraft, it turns things into 8/8s, so that could be your entire token army, it could be Chun Li, it could be a lot of things. Not to mention, it itself has an 8/8 body, and it has Ward 8, which means it's very difficult to get rid of. Next up, we have Sage of the Beyond. For 5 and 2 blue, this is a 5/5 body with flying. It has Foretell for 4 and a blue. So if you pay 2 to exile it, you can later pay 4 and a blue to cast it, which is 1, or is it 1? It's 2 cheaper than what its current cost is. Spells you cast from anywhere other than your hand cost 2 less to cast, and that is including your exiled cards with kick counters on them. Some of these instants and sorceries do have a higher casting cost, and for good reason. Things like Akroma's Will, stuff like that, which are really good for this deck. Next up, we have Sten, Paranoid Partisan. For 1 white and 1 blue, this is a 2/2 body. As Sten, Paranoid Partisan enters the battlefield, you choose a card type other than creature or land. Spells you cast of the chosen card type cost 1 less to cast. And for 1, a white and a blue, you can exile Sten and return it to the battlefield under its owner's control and at the beginning of the next end step. Obviously, we put this in here for instance. It's very good that it has a self-blink ability so that you can re-choose which card it's seeing, but in here, that's not always necessary. In fact, it's very rarely necessary. The blink effect also does help it avoid things like board wipes and stuff like that, removal, stuff like that, so just keep that in mind. But we have it in here for cost reduction, so there's quite a few redundancies in that. Next up, we have Tauren, Sky Summoner. This is 2 and 2 blue for a 2/2 body. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you create a 2/2 blue Drake creature token with flying. Yeah, more flying tokens. The evasion is very relevant. And then I believe last up, we have Vega the Watcher for 1, a blue, and a white. It is a 2/2 body with flying. Whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, you get to draw a card. Again, another draw engine here that specifically looks for things being cast outside your hand. So, for instance, again, the exiled cards with a kick counter on them. All right, next up, we're going to look at the instants, and like I said, this is the meat of the deck. There, I think, is 33 instants in here, so there was a lot of slots that were taken away from other sides to make sure that there was enough instants in here to actually warrant a Chun Li commander. All right, we're going to start off with Akroma's Will. This is 3 and a white. You get to choose one, but if you control your commander, you get to choose both. Creatures you control gain flying, vigilance, double strike until end of turn. Creatures you control gain lifelink, indestructible, protection from all colors until end of turn. It's just a great way to get a bunch of these keywords on there. The lifelink is really relevant. Flying is also relevant. Double strike, incredibly relevant. Vigilance as well. Protection means that makes it harder to block. Just a very good card. Instant speed. We got Arcane Denial for 1 and a blue. Counter target spell its controller may draw up to 2 cards at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep, and you draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. The counter spells in here are mostly to help keep Chun-Li on the table. You probably should not use the counter spells as part of the multi-kicker, because when she attacks, it immediately copies those unless you suspect that your opponents are going to try and do something at the beginning of combat or mid-combat to try and get rid of Chun-Li. Most of the time, your opponents are going to try and deal with her before you move to the attack step so that you don't get any trigger from her at all. Next up, we have Aspirant's Ascent. This is 1 blue. Instant speed until end of turn. Target creature gets +1/+3 and gains flying and toxic 1. It's really difficult to close out a game with this deck because, like I said, there's a lot of removal. So if you can get the poison counters out there, this is one helpful way of closing out a game sooner. Next up, we have Azorius Charm for 1 white and 1 blue. You can choose one to either give all your creatures lifelink to draw a card, or put target attacking or blocking creature on top of its owner's library. Next up, we have Boon of Safety for 1 white. Put a shield counter on target creature and then scry 1. Shield counter just makes it indestructible for an instance. The minute that shield counter is used up, then it no longer is indestructible. We got Brain Freeze for 1 and a blue. Target player puts the top 3 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard, and it has Storm. So we get to mill our opponents for each spell that was cast previous to this spell. Or you could mill yourself, I suppose. It's good for milling yourself because we get more instants in the graveyard, but you also have to be careful with that. Next up, we have Brainstorm for 1 blue. You draw 3 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. Then we got our OG counterspell here for 2 blue. We got Disenchant here for 1 and a white. Destroy target artifact or enchantment. This is actually super relevant in this deck. We got Dovin's Veto for 1 white and 1 blue. It can't be countered and encounters target non-creature spell. We got Experimental Augur in here for 1 and a blue. Look at the top 3 cards of your library. Put 1 of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order and proliferate. So if we manage to get that poison counter on there, or if we manage to get some +1/+1 counters out there, we can proliferate those to help cinch up a game. Next up, we have Fact or Fiction for 3 and a blue. Reveal the top 5 cards of your library. An opponent separates those into 2 piles. Put 1 into the graveyard and 1 into your hand. We got Frantic Search for 2 and a white. You get to draw 2 cards and then discard 2 cards and then untap up to 3 lands. Potential to go infinite there. Well, I guess not in this deck, now that I think about it. We got Generous Gift for 2 and a white. Destroy target permanent. Its controller gets a 3/3 elephant. 3/3 green elephant creature token. Next up, we have High Tide for 1 blue. Until end of turn, all islands produce an additional blue mana when tapped. This is really great in this deck because you can cast it. Well, I guess you don't get to cast it for free. I totally forgot I talked about that. We got Leap in here for 1 blue. Target creature gains flying until end of turn and draw a card. Again, this is for the evasion, plus it's cantrip. We got Long-Term Plans in here for 2 and a blue. Search your library for a card, shuffle your library, then put that card 3rd from the top. We're going to be drawing a lot, so this putting it 3rd from the top is actually not that bad. It's a really interesting tutor. It is possibly on the cut list. There are quite a few cantrips I wasn't able to put in here because I just didn't own them at the time that I may switch out for this. Next up, we have Loran's Escape for 1 white. Target artifact or creature gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. You get to scry 1. Protection, just like the Boon of Safety. We got Mystical Tutor for 1 blue. Search your library for an instant or sorcery card. Reveal it, then shuffle and put it on top. Again, we're just trying to tutor for cards. The benefit, I believe, of the long-term plan is that it's any card. Yeah, for a card versus Mystical Tutor, which specifically looks for instant sorcery. So it's only possibly on the cut list, but we'll see. Next up, we have Opt for 1 blue. Scry 1, then draw a card. We got Path to Exile for 1 white. Exile target creature. Its controller may search the library for a land. Put that land onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. We got Pongify for 1 blue. Destroy target creature. It can't be regenerated. Its controller gets a 3/3 green ape creature token. Then we got Prologue to Forestus for 1 and a blue. Each opponent gets a poison counter, and you get to draw a card. Again, we're going to take advantage of poison counters. It's not my favorite thing to do, but in a deck like this with so many vulnerabilities, sometimes the best way to close out a game is to get those poison counters out there and just proliferate. Plus, it's a cantrip. Got Sagiri's Shelter in here for 1 and a white. Target creature you control gains protection from a color of your choice until end of turn. It is also MDFC with a white mana producing land on the other side. This is also on the cut list for a card like Shelter, which is basically the same thing except a cantrip, and it costs the same amount. It's not MDFC, so you cut yourself a land here, or a possible land anyway. But I think Shelter being a cantrip is a little bit better. We got Serum Snare for 1 and a blue. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. If the permanent had a mana value of 3 or less, you get to proliferate. Got Shadow Rift for 1 blue. Target creature gains shadow until end of turn, and you get to draw a card. We got Show of Confidence for 1 and a white. Whenever you cast this spell, copy it for each other instant and sorcery spell you've cast this turn. You may choose new targets. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. It gains vigilance until end of turn. This is a good way to get a bunch of +1/+1 counters on Chun Li and make her even more of a target, but more importantly, bigger. Next, we have Snap for 1 and a blue. Return target creature to its owner's hand, and you get to untap up to 2 lands. Next, we have Swords to Plowshares for 1 white. Exile target creature. Its controller gains life equal to its power. Then we have Take Up the Shield for 1 and a white. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. It gains lifelink and indestructible until end of turn. This one is just really good. It's not quite the boon where we get a shield counter, so the shield counters can stack up. We can get multiple shield counters on a single creature. But this one puts a +1/+1 counter, which is relevant for proliferate. I guess shield counters are also relevant for proliferate. But we also get lifelink as well as indestructible. So it's not just a protection spell. It's a very good aggressive protection spell. Got Thought Scour for 1 blue. Target player mills 2 cards and draw a card. Again, you should mill yourself in this deck at least a couple of times just so you can get more instants into your graveyard, especially if you have Octavia in hand. But you can also use this offensively against your opponents, especially if you have a Brain Freeze already slotted away. You can really become obnoxious with the milling. Next, we have Valorous Stance for 1 and a white. You get to choose one. Either target creature gains indestructible intel end of turn, or destroy target creature with toughness 4 or greater. This has a lot of versatility in it because you can use it for protection, but you can also just outright kill things that are really big in the toughness department, which generally a lot of creatures share the same toughness as they have power, so you usually get rid of something relatively powerful as well. If not, you get rid of a very good blocker. And then finally, finally we have You Come to a River for 1 and a blue. You get to choose one. You either return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, or target creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn and cannot be blocked. Again, really great evasion, but also the versatility here with the ability to just bounce non-land permanents is really important, especially if there's what's the word for that? Problematic non-land permanents on the field. So that's our instant suite. Next up, we're going to take a look at the sorceries. There are only 5 of them, I believe. Starting with something like Solve the Equation. For 2 and a blue, you get to search your library for an instant or sorcery card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. It is sorcery speed, but it is a tutor, so if you're looking for a very specific instant to help you, let's say you've already got the poison counters out there and you need to proliferate, this is a good way to do that. Next up, we have Slash the Ranks for 3 and 2 white. Destroy all creatures and planeswalkers except commanders. Well, you are most importantly trying to keep your commander alive, so this is a great way to wipe the board and keep your commander there. It will miss their commanders as well, which again, that's what you have the evasion for. But also on top of that, likely when you cast this, you don't have any other creatures except for your commander anyway. Next up, we have Time Wipe for 2 white and 1 blue. Return target creature you control to its owner's hand, then destroy all creatures. This is again similar. We are just trying to keep our commander from dying because we don't want to increase the commander tax. This just bounces it back to your hand, destroys everything, and gives you an opportunity to recast it. Next up, we have Windfall for 2 and a blue. Each player discards his or her hand and then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards discarded this way. This is a great way to pad your graveyard with instants and sorceries and also just see a new hand. This also really puts a wrench in a lot of opponents' plans because a lot of the time they don't want to discard their hands. So wheel effects are always fun in that way. And then lastly, we have Wrath of God. Worst case scenario, just destroy everything. Like I said, this deck is fairly susceptible to removal, and the likelihood of you having a board state of creature permanents is pretty low in general, so Wrath of God usually ends up being one-sided anyway. Next, we're going to take a look at artifacts. We're going to start with an Aetherflux Reservoir because it's just darn good in here. Whenever you cast a spell, you gain a life for each spell you've cast this turn. You can pay 50 life, and Aetherflux Reservoir deals 50 damage to target creature or player. Every time you cast an instant, you're going to gain a life for each spell that was already cast. So the first time it's 1 life, the second time it's 2 life, the third time it's 3 life, so on and so forth. So this gets obnoxious. If you can get this on the field and stick it, it makes you a lot less vulnerable when Chun Li dies because you'll be padding your life total. Next up, we have Arcane Signet. It's a rock. It costs 2. You can tap it for your commander identity. We have Azorius Signet, another rock. It costs 2. You can pay 1 to filter for Azorius colors. Got Felwar Stone, another rock for 2. You can tap it to add 1 mana that your opponent's lands can produce. We have Mind Splice Apparatus for 3 and a blue. It has flash at the beginning of your upkeep. Put an oil counter on Mind Splice Apparatus. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each oil counter on Mind Splice Apparatus. If this sticks on the field, this can potentially just bring all of your instant sorcery costs down to the colored pips, and that's it. And since I don't think anything in here costs over 4 generic mana, once it hits 4 counters, you're pretty much just paying colored pips at that point. Next up, we have Primal Amulet. Costs 4 instant and sorcery spells you cast, cost 1 less to cast. And whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, put a charge counter on Primal Amulet. If there are 4 more charge counters on Primal Amulet, remove it and transform it into Primal Wellspring. You can tap Primal Wellspring to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, and then when that mana is spent to cast an instant or sorcery spell, copy that spell and choose new targets for the copy. Again, we're just trying to get as many instants played in a single turn, and usually things that will either bounce, destroy, or give evasion to allow you to actually get in or even protect Chun Li. So this is a great card for copying those types of effects. All right, next up we have Sentinel Tower for 4. Whenever an instant or sorcery spell is cast during your turn, Sentinel Tower deals damage to any target equal to 1 plus the number of instant and sorcery spells cast before that spell this turn. One thing that's really beautiful about this card is that it sees the whole turn. So if you cast this after you've cast like 3 or 4 instants or sorceries, it still sees those cast afterward. So if you cast another one, it'll see the previous ones. And much like Aetherflux Reservoir, where you're gaining life equal to the number of spells you cast prior to the spell you cast, this one just does damage. Now, this is really good at being used for spot removal for creatures, but it's also really good at just dealing a lot of incidental damage to your opponents. If it sticks, it's pretty powerful. We've got Soul Ring. It's a rock. It costs 1. You can tap it for 2. We've got Swiftfoot Boots. It costs 2. Equipped creature has hexproof and haste, and you can equip it for 1. We do not have Lightning Greaves in here because Lightning Greaves gives Shroud, and Shroud makes it so that you cannot target Chun Li yourself, whereas hexproof just says your opponents can't target. So we only have the Swiftfoot Boots in here for protection. We got Talisman of Progress, another rock for cost 2. You can tap it for colorless, or you can tap it for white and blue if you take 1 damage. And then we have Thought Vessel. It's another rock, cost 2. You can tap it to add 1 colorless to your mana pool, anything. Also, you have no maximum hand size, which can be important if you manage to get the card draw stuff onto the table. Next up, we're going to look at enchantments. There are only 4 enchantments. We start with Jace's Sanctum. Again, redundancy for cost reduction. Instant and sorcery spells cost 1 less to cast. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you get to scry 1, so we can start sculpting what we're going to draw. We got Metallurgic Summons for 3 and 2 blue. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create an XX colorless construct artifact creature token where X is the spell's mana value. For 3 and 2 blue, exile Metallurgic Summonings, return all instant and sorcery cards from your graveyard to your hand, activate only if you control 6 or more artifacts. That part of the text might not happen because you have to have 6 or more artifacts, and that's not very likely in this deck. But the creating little 1/1s again, 2/2s, whatever it is the mana value of that spell is really important, so we can create an army of little Metallurgic Summons. Next up, we have Swarm Intelligence for 6 and a blue. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. This is a very high cost enchantment. There is some likelihood that this will just not see the table. So this is definitely a high target for cutting, but if you get it on the table, it does some serious work here. We just copy everything that we cast from that point on, which can be pretty deadly if Chun Li is able to attack. And finally, we got Vesuvian Duplimancy for 3 and a blue. Whenever you cast a spell that targets only a single artifact or creature you control, create a token that's a copy of that artifact or creature, except it's not legendary. So we can create a bunch of copies of Chun Li, And when Chun Li attacks, copy each exiled card that you own with a kick counter on it. It does not say that she put a kick counter on. So each of the Chun Li's will see all of the cards that were exiled with kick counters on them. So this can be kind of also just deadly. And if you can create an army of Chun Li's, suddenly the game gets really, really dire for your opponents. Unfortunately, as far as commander damage is concerned, if I was reading correctly, each Chun Li is her own version of a commander and therefore deals a different version of commander damage. So you won't be able to just stack a whole bunch of Chun Li's to get a single instance of a lot of commander damage, but still, being able to recast a bunch of instants over and over again and just create a huge army of Chun Li's would be a really good way to close out a game. Now we're going to look at non-basic lands. We have Azorius Chancery. It's a bounce land for blue-white. We have Command Tower, which taps for commander identity. We have Desert Beach, which is a check land for blue-white. We have Glacial Fortress, another check land for blue-white. We have Hallowed Fountain, a shock land for blue-white that has basic land typings. We have Hengegate, which is an MDFC for blue and white. We have Mystic Sanctuary that if it enters the battlefield untapped, you get to return an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to the top of your library. And in order for it to enter the battlefield untapped, you must have 3 other islands already in play. It also has a basic land typing. We have Nimbus Maze, which is the weirdest blue-white land ever. You can tap it for colorless, or you can tap it for white, only if you control an island, or you can tap it for blue, only if you control a plains. We have Port Town, another check land for blue-white. No, I'm sorry, this is a reveal land. We have a Port Town, which is a reveal land for blue-white. We have Reliquary Tower, which gives you no hands, which gets rid of your maximum hand size and taps for colorless. We have Rogue's Passage that taps for colorless, or you can tap 4 and it to give target creature unblockable until end of turn. We have Sea of Clouds, which is a crowd land for blue-white. And then we have Seachrome Coast, which is a fast land for blue-white. And then lastly, we're going to have our basic lands. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13 islands. And we also have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 plains. So that is the Chun Li Spellslinger deck. Like I said, it operates very similarly to Feather. In the sense that what we're doing is attacking and then casting instants that we've already cast before to get a large amount of value from them. It benefits really heavily from cantrips. It benefits really heavily from reoccurring protection spells and evasion spells as well. But the downside that Chun Li has that Feather doesn't have is that those cards only ever will be able to get activated when you attack with Chun Li, because they'll be exiled from your graveyard with a kick counter on them. Whereas Feather just gets them back to her hand and can really just cast them whenever. So she becomes very vulnerable to removal and just in general aggro decks that are just faster. But she is formidable in the sense that because of what she can do with those kick counters, she almost becomes a kill on sight type of commander. This can be very disheartening because unfortunately you kind of want your commander to be in play, and it can make the game really unfun if your opponents are just constantly checking you. But I have, like I said, played this deck a couple of times, and in the times that this has stuck on the battlefield, it has become an absolute nightmare for my opponents. So even if you only get to use her ability, 2-3 times during the entire course of a commander game, that's still a lot of value for her. Yeah, that is it. Chun Li, Countless Kicks, or Zethi, Arcane Blade Master, I think it was. Yeah, Arcane Blade Master. If you have any questions or comments, leave those down below, but keep it positive. I will remove negative comments, and until next time, guys, peace.